Hi, welcome to a Sunny Book Nook. My name is Sunny and I read and review books on this channel, and I try to focus on queer literature, lesbian books, and a lot of contemporary literary fiction, a lot of speculative fiction, fantasy, short story collection, science fiction, basically anything and everything. So yeah, that's what I'm into. And if you haven't already, you should watch part 1 of my October wrap-up, where I talk about the first 6 books that I read in the month of October. This video I'm talking about the second half of the month of October, like the other 6 books I read. So let's just get right into it. The first book, well, not the first book that I read in the month, but the first book after the last book that I was just talking about, that I read in the month of October, was The Traitor Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. Yes, this book is very hyped, especially by the lesbian fantasy readers of the world, I would say, or just like fantasy readers in general. People seem to really fuck with this, and you know, I get it. I rated it like 4 stars, maybe I would give it 3.5. This book is about this woman who grows up on an island that is becoming incorporated into the empire, and the empire does this thing where instead of conquering lands, it sort of uses trade to integrate new other countries into its own empire and its ever-expanding powers, you know. And so basically she becomes part of this culture and assimilates into it and climbs through the ranks of the power structure within this empire, despite the fact that she comes from a sort of like family structure and household and culture that is like denigrated, of course, by the empire. And it is quite a compelling, sort of twisty political read about how she maneuvers and manipulates her way through these various roles she attempts to take on as she goes from child to adult, and the ways that this empire's imposition of like social, political, economic, and cultural and religious rules impact people's lives, and how she is supposed to implement them as one of the bureaucrats of the state. Our main character is quite brilliant, obviously, and she is very repressed as well, and she is also definitely a war criminal. So it is interesting to be in her perspective, and there's a lot of, like I said, twists and turns. I didn't really see a lot of what the fuck was coming, especially because I didn't really understand what was going on. Well, I mean, I got what was going on, but I also was just like, what? I mean, I think ideologically and politically, I think it can be pretty dense to understand and unpack, or I don't know. But I get why a lot of people love it and why it has a semi-indie cult following. I just don't think I'm a part of it necessarily, and it just didn't engross me in a way that other fantasy novels have in the past. You know, but I do see its appeal, and I do think it was quite smart, and I don't know, it's just smart in a way that, because I didn't really love it, I don't think I have that many smart things to say about it, even though I can tell that it's really intelligent, and it's not something that I would want to necessarily revisit, because in speaking to people who do love this book, they are like, oh yeah, in my reread I was like, oh wow, how did I not pick up on this, and like, whoa, like this is so cool, like he's so brilliant in constructing this, and you know, I mean, I'm like, yeah, I feel that way about a lot of other books. But okay, sorry, audio setting has changed because I was getting sweaty. I always get fucking sweaty when I film because I'm just a sweaty ass person. So windows cracked open, and thus you can hear the wind in the fucking trees and like the cars going by and shit like that. Anyways, back to Mars by Asja Bakic. It's by a female Bosnian author. It was published by the Feminist Press and it was translated into English. I think it came out in like 2019 or something like that. But it is a speculative fiction short story collection that was really, really interesting and weird and strange. Each short story felt kind of surreal and removed from reality because it was, but also kind of grounded in it, in a lot of its criticisms and obviously the statements that it's making about the world, and even just like the philosophical things that it's contending with through like the humor and minute interactions that the characters that our author builds for us. So I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I thought it was quite like quirky and unique and like kind of fun despite it being quite dark at times. It's like confusing and interesting and vague in a way that only like speculative fiction really is. Also, my voice is like fucked up because my throat is like, anyway, that's just whatever, but that's why I sound a little clogged up, because I am. Anyway, so yeah, Mars was really weird and really good, I think. I liked it. And it had this like sort of choppy writing style that I think I kind of attribute to translated literature a lot, because it seems like that's, at least from what I've read, it has that sort of like rhythm to it. And it's like almost like kind of sparse, but I still, yeah. I mean, I think the concepts were really interesting, and the way that they unfolded were kind of like playful as well. So yeah, I rated this like 4 stars, I think. The next book that I read was Reluctant Immortals by Gwendolyn Kiste. This book I rated 2 stars. I did not enjoy it. I don't fuck with this. I think it is mid at best. It was not really good. Basically, it's set in the 1970s, and it's about these various dead women, dead fictional women. So there's like Dracula's bride, who is a vampire, obviously, and so she's been like alive, so she's immortal, obviously. And then she's been like shacked up and living with like Bertha, what's the name? The woman who is in Mr. Rochester's attic in Jane Eyre. And so basically they're like living in this like rotting house in LA in the 70s. They get sent on this wild fucking goose chase because Jane Eyre like fucking shows up at the door, and also our main character, because we're in the perspective of Dracula's vampire wife type girl, she like hates Dracula. She killed him, actually. She keeps him in these urns, and she keeps them in separate urns, like separated from each other, so that he can't like come alive and, you know, come back and haunt her and terrorize the world and turn more girls into undead creatures the way that he's manipulated and groomed her and, you know, whatever. So we see all that, and I don't know, I just think that like, the plot, the pacing, the characters, all just so mediocre to me, like not very compelling. Everything that happened, I was just like, this did not, it was simultaneously predictable and like so frustrating. I also think that like, I mean, I think the feminist themes about like literature and the world and whatever, very on the nose and very surface level, I would say. So yeah, I would skip this one, but I don't know, maybe you would enjoy it. I don't know you. Alright, next book I want to talk about is Negroland by Margo Jefferson. This book is a memoir, obviously written by Margo Jefferson, about her life as a upper middle class Black woman growing up in Chicago in kind of one of the nicer neighborhoods, and her family history and legacy, and then her own experiences as a child and as an adolescent and as an adult and as a writer, and her understanding of post-Reconstruction, post-ish Jim Crow era for around mid to late 20th century Black Americans, and all of her really complex reflections on her personal, interpersonal, political, social, and emotional realities. And it was so dense, rich, and smart. I have studied a lot of American history and race relations in American history, and the way that she encapsulates it, I think, is honestly a really good, not even crash course, but like a nuanced perspective that is something that you would get in like an upper division like history of race class, while still giving you sort of the necessary context, I guess, because it's like a memoir. And it's not like she's speaking to an audience that she knows has zero understanding of what the fuck she's talking about. But at the same time, she is delineating her own experiences with what she calls negroland. And basically, this is the label or the category or how she's defining her experiences and her environment of like upper middle class, like suburban or just like nice, well-off Black American culture and lifestyle dynamics. And it was very, very good. It was very introspective and brilliant, while also being very like literary almost and academic at the same time, in the way that she like breaks down her relationship to sociopolitical understandings of like Black life and culture as she was living in the midst of its construction and in the aftermath of its construction, and like her growing up in her neighborhood and how her church and her mom treated her, and Jack and Jill, and going to like an integrated nice private school and being one of the only Black girls there, and like what she was allowed to wear and how her hair is allowed to look like, and what schools she and her friends were supposed to go to, and how she had like white friends and then like Black friends, and there were some like white girls who were like, oh, we can, like, they're cool, like we can bring them to our like Black parties, but when we go to, we're always like the only individual ones at their parties. Or, you know, when I bring my white friends home as a little kid to play with me and my parents are like, or when I'm playing in the neighborhood and their mom is like, actually, no, you can't play with them anymore, we're moving, or how the neighborhood demographics like change and how we're like, okay, my family is like, let's move now because we need to maintain like, and how like the neighborhood itself maintains its own like sense of niceness and well-offness, and the sort of intentional liberal race inclusion and the weird performativity of that, as well as the like way that, because her family was like in these circles, like it was like her mom was like friends with like a lot of the Black cultural producers of the time, people in her family passing, and and of course like colorism. There's so much explored within this memoir, because obviously this woman's life contains all of this, as well as like everything else that she is attributing as like emerging from this experience, which is why she's like, you know, titled this memoir what she's titled it. So yeah, very, very good memoir, very, very good book. A humorous, intelligent look at 20th century African American history. If you don't know anything about it, or if you know a lot about it, I think you'll get a lot from this, if that makes sense. The next book that I read was Lesbian Choices by Claudia. This book I bought at the Strand. I had so many, like annotations and highlights and shit in here. My Strand bookstore bookmark, sick. This book was so interesting and so good, and I think I'm probably going to use a little bit of it, like elements of it, for like my research and my projects and shit in the future, because I really enjoyed a lot of the way that this book brings together just like canonical philosophy, because our author is a philosopher, as well as feminist lesbian understandings of interacting with the world, and understanding like media and social relations and lesbian community and identity. So there's a chapter in here about lesbian friendship that I think is probably my favorite. I really enjoyed what she has to say about what it means to understand or read or identify media, like lesbian media, or identify media as lesbian. I really liked her chapter. Well, I thought it was really interesting, her chapter about abuse within lesbian relationships, or like violence in them, and the lack of sort of data and also material about this, because this was published in the 90s. A lot of like lesbian literature was, I think, like that sort of like theory and shit like that, right? So this is interesting. There were some parts of it that I was like, whatever, I don't really care. Like the military band chapter, I kind of just skimmed through. But I think a lot of it was interesting. There was a chapter on like lesbian ethics and the idea of like sadomasochism or sadomasochism, which was like a big thing that people were debating amongst radical feminist and lesbian circles during this time. And also just like homophobia and where it comes from and what it means for like lesbians and gay people ourselves to be like homophobic, and also like the politics of outing someone and what that means. So that was really interesting. It was all so fascinating, and yeah, I would definitely recommend this. It gave me a lot to think about, and I sent so many, the chapter on lesbian friendship is online, and I sent that one to so many of my lesbian friends, and yeah, it made me think so many things, and I wanted to send so many parts of it to so many people that I knew. But the next and last book that I read in October was Bad Gays, A Homosexual History by Hugh Lemmey and Ben Miller, who are two British white gays who run the podcast Bad Gays. And so I listened to the audiobook of it, actually, because the publisher sent me this book like quite a few months ago at this point, which I really appreciate. But I really, really enjoyed this. I thought it was such a good sort of collection of short, humorous biographies of different bad gay people across history and the ways that they were products of their environment and how they contributed to reproducing systems of colonialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and how their like homosexuality affected or was in relationship to those things. So very smart, very critical, engaged with a lot of theory and text and ideas that I already have knowledge of and agree with and think is really, really good, and it sort of brought that into the context of like history and specific history and queer history in a way that, like, for me as like a history nerd, as like a queer culture nerd, queer history lover, just adored. And it was also pretty funny, and I giggled a few times listening to this, so would definitely recommend it. And I would recommend the audiobook as well, which I think I listened to on Hoopla, so you can get it on Hoopla if you have a public library account and have that app downloaded. So my gay ass nonfiction books that I read in October. What's scarier than gay people? That's all of the books I've read, well, part 2 of all the books I read in October. But thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are, or if you want to read any of these, and why. But thank you so much for watching this, and I will see you in my next video, hopefully. So subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, bye.